Hello, everyone. This is David Betty. I might need to divide this one up because it's going to be long, but I'm going to do a series and a podcast on the documents for the United States. Since this incident down in Venezuela, I'm going to start with the Monroe Doctrine, being as that's the one that they're trying to invoke for this action. So the Monroe Doctrine, seventh annual message to Congress, December 2nd, 1823. From President James Monroe's seventh annual message, Congress, December 2nd, 1823, at the proposal of the Russian imperial government made through the minister of emperor residing here, full power of instruction have been transmitted to the minister of the United States at St. Petersburg to arrange by amicable negotiations the respective rights and interests of two nations on the northwest coast of this continent. A similar proposal has been made by His Imperial Majesty to the government of the Great Britain, which has likewise been acceded to the government of the United States, has been Desirous, Deisirous, I know I can pronounce, by this friendly proceeding of manifesting the great value which they have invariably attached to the friendship of the emperor and the solicitude to cultivate the best understanding with government. In the discussion to which this interest has given rise, and in the arrangements by which they may terminate, the occasion has been judged proper for asserting as a principle in which the rights of interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents be the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintain are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonizations by any European power. It was stated at the commencement of the last session that the great effort was then making in Spain and Portugal to improve the conditions of their people of those countries. And it is appeared to be conducted with extraordinary moderation. It need scarcely be remarked that the result has been so far very different from what was then anticipated. Our events in which quarter of the globe with which we have so much intercourse and from which we derive our origins, we have always been anxious and interested spectators, citizens of the United States, cherish sentiments the most friendly and favorable of the liberty and happiness of their fellow men on that side of the Atlantic. In the wars of the Europe powers, in the matters relating to themselves, we have never taken any part, nor does it port with our policy to do so. It is only when our rights are invaded or seriously menaced that we resent injury or make preparation for our defense. And if you read it on the screen, it will be misspelled, but that's the way it was spelled in the document. With the movements in the hemisphere, we are of necessity more immediate connected and by cause which must be obvious to all enlightened impartial observer. The political system of the Allied powers is essentially different in this respect from that of America. The difference proceeds from that which exists in their respective governments and to the defense of our own, which has been achieved by the loss of so much blood and treasure and matured by the wisdom of their most enlightened citizens, and under which we have enjoyed unexampled felicity. Okay. This nation is devoted. We owe it, therefore, to candor and to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. With the existing colonies or dependency of any European power, we have not interfered and shall not interfere. but with the governments who have declared their independence and maintained it, and whose independence we have on great consideration and on just principle are acknowledged. We could not view any interposition from the purpose of oppress them or controlling in any manner their destiny by any European power in any other light than as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition towards the United States. In the war between those new governments and Spain, we declare our neutrality at time of their recognition, and to this we have adhered and shall continue to adhere, provided no change shall occur, which in the judgment of our competent authorities of this government shall make a correspondent change on the part of the United States indispensable of their security. The late events in Spain and Portugal show that Europe is still unsettled of this important fact. No stronger proof can be adduced than that the Allied powers should have thought proper on any principle satisfactory to themselves to have interposed by force in the internal concerns of Spain. To what extent such interpositions may be carried on the same principle is a question to which all independent powers, those governments, differ from theirs, and interested even those most remote, and surely none more than the United States. Our policy in regard to Europe, which it was to adopt at an early stage the wars which have so long agitated that quarter of the globe, nevertheless remains the same, which is not to interfere in the internal concerns of any of its powers, to consider the government de facto as the legitimate government, for us to cultivate friendly relations with it, and to preserve those relations by a frank, firm, manly policy, meeting in all instances the justice claims of every power, submitted to injuries from none. But in regard to these continents, circumstances are eminently and conspicuously different. It is impossible that the Allied powers should extend their political system so any portion of their continent without endangering our peace and happiness, nor can anyone believe that our southern brethren, if left to themselves, would adopt it of their own accord. It is equally impossible, therefore, that we should behold such interposition in any form with indifference. If we look to the comparative strength and resources of Spain and those new governments and their distance from each other, it must be obvious that she can never subdue them. It is still true policy of the United States to leave the parties to themselves in the hopes that other powers will pursue the same course. And that was James Monroe. James Monroe's doctrine. That was a speech he made in 1823. The Monroe Doctrine articulates in 1823 remains the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. While President Monroe delivered the message, it was primarily drafted and edited by his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, who ensured the statement was unilaterally American declaration rather than a joint one with Britain. In the text, the Monroe Doctrine, here's kind of a summary. The doctrine was not a single document, but was embedded in the Monroe's seventh annual message to the Congress on December 2nd, 1823. Adams primarily contribution as removing inflammatory language regarding Europe internal affairs, such as the Greek War of Independence, to focus strictly on the Western Hemisphere. Key excerpts, non-colonization. The American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, and are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European power. On the non-intervention, here's a key excerpt. We owe it, therefore, to candor and to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and our safety. In 1906, Roosevelt corollary, Corollary, in practice. By 1906, the doctrine had evolved from the defensive warning into a interventional tool known as the Roosevelt Corollary in 1904. The Corollary asserts that the U.S. had right to exercise international policing power in Latin America and to prevent European intervention due to debt or instability. In 1906, the intervention in Cuba followed a dispute, election, and internal unrest in Cuba. The United States invoked the Monroe Doctrine via Platt Amendment to initiate the second occupation of Cuba in 1906 to 1909. The Root Doctrine in July 1906, Secretary of State Elihu Root toured South America and attempted to soften the doctrine's image by emphasizing sovereignty, equality through U.S. continued to maintain its self-appointed role as regional policeman. In the 1960-1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, during the Cold War, the doctrine faced its greatest challenge when the Soviet Union, a non-hemispheric power, established a military presence in Cuba, 1960 context. In July 1960, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev famously declared that the Monroe Doctrine had died a natural death, now a stinking corpse. In 1962 applications during the missile crisis, President John F. Kennedy avoided explicitly naming the Monroe Doctrine in legal documents to stay within the framework of the UN and OAS charter. However, in October 22nd, 1962, speech was a modern application of it, stating that any nuclear missiles launched from Cuba would be seen as an attack by the USSR on the United States, or US, effectively enforcing the non-extension of foreign systems to the hemisphere. Modern use, claims by Donald J. Trump. President Donald Trump, in his administration 2017 to 2021 and 2025 to present, have explicitly revived the Monroe Doctrine by name, a departure from previous administrations that viewed the term as outdated or imperialist. UN General Assembly 2018, Trump stated, "It has been the former policy of our country since the President Monroe that we reject the interference of foreign nations in this hemisphere." The Trump Corollary 2025 to 2026 is in the National Security Strategy, NSS, published in December 2025. The administration introduced the Trump Corollary, which frames the doctrine as tools to exclude Chinese and Russian economic and military influence from Latin America. Venezuela, 2026. Most recent, the U.S. invoked these principles during the January 3rd, 2026 operation in Venezuela, claiming the extra hemispheric support of Maduro regime violated the core tenets of the hemispheric security as defined by the 1823 doctrine. On December 2nd, 2025, President Donald Trump, America made this proclamation, America 250, presidential message on the anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine, December 2nd, 2025. On December 2nd, 1823, the doctrine of the American sovereignty was immortalized in the prose. President James Monroe declared before the nation a simple truth that he has echoed throughout the ages. The United States will never waver in defense of our homeland, our interest, or the well-being of our citizens. Today, my administration proudly reaffirms this promise under new Trump authority to the Monroe Doctrine that the American people, not foreign nations nor globalist institutions, will always control their own destiny in our hemisphere. More than 2 centuries ago, President Monroe proclaimed before the United States Congress what is today known as the legendary Monroe Doctrine, a bold policy that rejected foreign interference of faraway nations and confidentially asserts United States leadership in the Western Hemisphere, the American continent, by the free and independent conditions which they have assumed and maintain are henceforth not to be considered as subject for future colonizations by any European power. President Monroe professed with those mighty words, the very nation knew that the United States of America was emerging as a superpower unlike anything the world had ever known, and that nothing could ever rival that strength, unity, and the resolve for freedom-loving people. In the centuries since, President Monroe's doctrine of sovereignty has guarded the American continent against communism, fascism, and foreign infringement. And as the 47th President of the United States, I am proudly reasserting this time-honored policy. Since I took office, I have aggressively pursued an America First policy of peace through strength. We restore United States privilege access through the Panama Canal. We are reestablishing American maritime dominance. We are disrupting non-market practices in the international supply chain and logistics sector. My administration is also halting the flow of deadly drugs flowing through the Mexico, ending the invasion of illegal aliens and among our southern border, and the dismantling narco-terrorist network all across the Western Hemisphere to defend our nation's work and industry. I recently secured historic trade deals with El Salvador, Argentina, Ecuador, and Guatemala, allowing greater and more streamlined market access. Reinvigorated by my Trump quarterly, the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well, and America leadership is coming roaring back stronger than ever before. Today, we renew our pledge always uphold American sovereignty, security, and safety first. Above all, we vow to protect our cherished national legacy of Republican self-government against all threats, foreign and domestic. Wow. I noticed you put the word Republican in there instead of a democratic self-government against the threat, all threats, or a republic self-government. He said Republican. So we've got keys there. He's claiming the Americas, as we've seen lately, claiming the Americas as part of the United States and saying that they are all included. He has also said Republican, meaning Republican government, not a democratic government. We are a republic, a representative republic, which means we are governed by a document, Constitution, and represented through our representatives that we duly elect into those positions. But have we made the deal to be the police of the Western Hemisphere? Maybe he has, maybe he hadn't. But I think this is one of those areas where I disagree that we step into other people's policies. And like I've said, what is the deal that changed on January 3rd to make the invasion of Venezuela? What changed? What was any different than December, November, and before that? I've heard that people said that President Biden did not react enough. He tried to do it through diplomatic means. It didn't work. Well, did it or didn't? We don't know for sure. We say that we're trying to keep China out of our hemisphere, but yet they own property in the United States. They own land in the United States. They own businesses in the United States. So how are we keeping them out of our hemisphere? So there's that. Thank you for your time. Like, share, follow. Please remember, You are loved no matter what. And I will continue this. And I think I may start with the Magna Carta and then go through those documents. Thank you very much.